In Chapter 25, it discusses the debtor-creditor relations, federal bankruptcy code, the evolution of consumer law, trade practices and their relationships, and it touches on state consumer legislation. Needless to say, this chapter was jam-packed full of information, so I'm going to try and touch on a few of the takeaways that I got from the chapter. To start off, definition for creditor would be the lender in a transaction, and then the debtor would be the borrower in a transaction. So that's how you differentiate the debtor-creditor relations. Moving on into the bankruptcy code, it allows equitable distribution of the debtor's property among the debtor's creditors. It also discharges the debtor from its debts, enabling the debtor to rehabilitate itself and start fresh. Moving into the chapter, it touched on the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, and this prevents creditors from harassing consumer debtors at their places of work or at home. And then it said that there were some remedies to go about this. It listed civil actions to recover damages. Moving into the Dodd-Frank Act and consumer protection. The Dodd-Frank Act is defined as it prevents borrowers from paying a portion of the closing costs up front and then rolling the rest into a loan, basically. Some examples of this would be credit and debit cards, residential mortgages, credit scores, and then consumer loans. Towards the end of the chapter, it started talking about state consumer legislation, and this included the Uniform Consumer Credit Code. This is also known as the UCCC. It also talked about unfair and deceptive practices, as well as arbitration of consumer disputes. And then from the slides of Chapter 25, the global dimensions of consumer protection laws. It talked about the standardization of advertising and how it is hindered by different views on consumer protection and the protection of competition, as well as standards of morality. It also said that consumer protection differs in the amount of deception permitted in advertising. And to round off this chapter, I relate it back to everyday life by saying the Consumer Protection Act provides consumer rights to prevent fraud or unfair practices from occurring in today's society. So